So, most of the Dragon Ball community agrees with one sentiment, and it is this. There was no Western live action Dragon Ball movie. Hey guys, MasakoX here. We know that what we just said is a little bit of an overreaction. Only a little bit though. Of course, we know about the ill-fated story and legacy, infamous legacy, that is Dragon Ball Evolution. It was set to be its own little cinematic universe, with us all hoping that Bill Goldberg would be cast as Nappa one day. Not The Rock, because, come on, that's too obvious. Although nowadays, from a money point of view, it is kind of a no-brainer. In any case, that didn't happen, due to various factors. One being the fact that various executives who were in charge of funding the production were so tone-deaf about the original source material, as well as disrespectful to what made the show so popular in Japan in the first place, as well as the desires of Akira Toriyama, who was there to help, having an executive producer credit, but was promptly ignored. When it comes to anime movie adaptations, especially when you try to make an adaptation of a shonen anime, there is always the underlying problem that there are elements that are not easy to translate between various types of media, as well as geographical borders. There are a lot of things in anime that don't convert so well to American or Western media. Back in the day, this wasn't really a problem. It was an easy fix with little concern or regard for authenticity to the original source material. It was necessary to happen though back in the 90s and even the early 2000s to even allow anime the chance to get a foothold within Western markets. We would fix that problem later, but back then, it was needed. Now, if evolution ever had to happen as we got it, this was the era to do it in. It could have done better in this time. But yeah, the movie came about 10 years too late. Either way, with the exception of perhaps My Hero Academia, most anime series can't escape some kind of tweaking so as to not have moments where the audience goes at a joke or a remark or a reference, I don't get it. The only way you can possibly emulate the original thing is for the creator to be there on deck at all times, so that means every single nuance and trait is maintained and preserved. But that is very hard to manage, especially with creators who still make their content on a regular basis, their time being limited. And on top of that, the general style is a very different beast, as it were. Anime tends to be very vibrant, over the top, and over-expressive. Now, it must be said, a lot of cartoons nowadays from the US, especially in the 2010s, have been able to catch up with this, and convey a similar feeling and tone. Note the CalArts formula. But it's still got a long ways to go. That being said, it's nice to see more nods to anime in there in Western cartoons. But when you try to add the qualities of anime to a live-action movie, it's even harder to pull off. Yeah, more often than not, it comes out feeling fake, or that it's missing something that made the original so beloved, and it's something that just does not work in live action. It's not impossible to make work, but realistically, there are lots of times where it can crumble, and what's left is completely different to what the source material was going for. This is of course not an issue limited to anime adaptations, of course, I'm not singling this out here. This is something that can happen to almost any medium being turned into any other medium. Not every book will make a good movie. Not every movie would make a good game. Not every game would make a good movie. There are lots of factors that need to be taken into account here. But that being said, the best formula right now seems to be the long-form TV series format. 8 to 10 hour-long episodes where you can really explore the nuances of a world or a book without the confines of having 1 or 2 movies squished into a shorter time frame. Would Dragon Ball work with a similar format, the Netflix and streaming model? A long-form series with various seasons tackling all of the original run of episodes? Well, it would be cool, but there is one problem. It's already a long-run series. This isn't just like a 13 or 26 episode run, there are 150 plus episodes for just the original Dragon Ball alone. So okay, instead of being a downer on all of this, what if our channel was tasked with creating a Western Dragon Ball live-action franchise? What if we were told by a group of executives with a big pile of money to come up with a formula for a Dragon Ball live-action series that would work best with fans as well as draw in newcomers? And don't worry, Disney isn't the person behind this, so you can rest assured about that, chestnut. So, how would we approach it? First of all, we need to set the tone for this production. Now, if there was one thing that Evolution illustrated creatively, not necessarily perfectly, it was the initial summary, with the graphics and the basics of Roshi's power, and the Mafuba, and King Piccolo, of course. At least it wasn't text just scrolling on a black background with just some basic camera shots thrown in. Now, we need to stress this first point, as it's the most realistic one. Now, regretfully, most of the viewers of Dragon Ball are better acquainted with the Z portion of the story. Now, I know, you guys out there, you guys know your Dragon Ball, you're very versed and very savvy with the original material, and quite rightly so. It's how I feel about JoJo Part 2, Battle Tendency. It's just like that, the right amount of lore with a great adventure and characters along the way. It's pretty great, but that doesn't sell as much as Z does, sadly, in the West. But I think Haverock and I have a good compromise, though. We could perhaps focus a little more on the mystical adventure portion of what makes Dragon Ball great. Try and instill a charm, simplify Z's lore whilst remaining innovative and charming. We would have to be careful though, because changing too much of the formula would, understandably, and probably, confuse the vast majority of people's expectations towards Dragon Ball, as well as alienating the ones who already understand it. But then you got another quandary. You can't just simply omit the original Dragon Ball from the equation together, or limit it to a flashback scene. That would be unfair to the people who had watched the original thing, who had watched everything, as well as the overall integrity of the product. People new to it would think that the first story is merely supplemental, and that would be a heinous assumption. It is too important for the series' overall mythology. Now, truth be told, it would be a nice compromise to start from a place that was something more adventurous, but more in line with the domain of Z. And no, we aren't talking about King Piccolo for the first movie. We think that the best compromise is to connect the tournament saga with the Red Ribbon Army storyline, adding some creative tissue from the Emperor Pilaf saga, kind of like what Path to Power did. Now, if you're not familiar with Path to Power, all of this retelling a portion of the first arc with brand new animation. And that animation is probably one of the best examples of Dragon Ball animation in the series to date. That and Bulma's hair was lavender, as it was originally intended. Regardless of this modification, there would still have to be some narrative shortcuts taken to ensure we don't have a 3 or 4 hour movie on our hands. But at the end of the day, we think that these 3 storylines could give people a good overall idea about what the original Dragon Ball product was all about, before then going into King Piccolo for a full-on sequel. It might even encourage people to catch up with the original source material in their own time, and thusly lock them in for definite. Now, in terms of characterization, Goku is probably the character we think should be as close to the source material as possible. No Geeko, no Superman. Goku should be the same anti-heroic, likable doofus we know from the manga. It's actually sort of easy to do so in the earlier arcs, since Goku was intended to be a blank canvas of sorts in comparison to the side characters. They were the ones to bounce off Goku, and the Monkey Boy was there just to bind them all together. It's a good idea, but in terms of shonen anime and concept, it was a little risky, and something that Toriyama quickly walked back post the Pilaf saga. There is one thing we could do to ensure consistency. We could make him and Bulma a couple of years older, in order to not be forced to change the main cast for a second movie, and thusly, perhaps, film 2 movies in one go to make continuity even better. Now, as for Bulma, we would make her even more crafty, more adventurous, and ambitious than before. And what makes this really easy is that she was already quite progressive for an 80s anime character, especially a female anime character. She had brains, planning, as well as a raft of means of taking care of herself. But, this being the 80s, she did still succumb to some bouts of femininity which were very forced. We would aim to temper that a little bit, but not too much, so that means it comes across as trying to convey an agenda or anything like that. We would try to make her wants and needs feel more realistic to contemporary counterparts. Make it seem like Bulma's a real person. After that, they could meet Yamcha, who would be in possession of the second Dragon Ball, having stumbled across it in the desert and waiting for some poor sap who might want it in exchange for, naturally, vast quantities of money. Then, when they weren't looking, steal it back from them, and then repeat. We would start the story with the crashing of the Saiyan pod, and Grandpa Gohan finding it. That would establish a firm connection between the DB and Z portions of the story, and could be built upon in the future. we would know from the start that Goku wasn't from this world, and that whatever world he did come from had technology, as well as a different origin to ours. But the specifics though, oh, that could wait for the sequel. And there, we could have a moment of, oh, so that's what that meant! Then we would jump straight to the meeting of Bulma and Goku. We could make the actual first meeting of them the same time of when they were in the original anime, as well as establishing that they've been travelling for quite some time, and indicate that the Dragon Ball hunt that they are on now is not their first journey. But we can't make it too referential and cryptic. The biggest issue in writing a movie script is adding the wider cast of characters, as ideally you wouldn't want to skip out on anyone important. That's why these long-form series on these streaming services are just so good. You have a much greater chance of not having to cut things out, as well as expanding on almost everything, or maybe the original creator could modify things that they weren't too happy with on their first outing. It's a way of refining things really nicely. But in this case, realistically, this is a 2-hour story, so we had to cut someone. Sorry Tien and Chiaotzu, you guys will be in the sequel though. Masako, what about our transforming duo? Well, I think they'd have to get the chop too for this movie. Oolong and Puar would be probably delegated to cameos instead of being full-on characters. The biggest challenge of this first movie is to fit the whole tournament into it, as well as all the Master Roshi bits beforehand, and I think the smartest way to do this would be to make Goku stay with Roshi from the start, and thusly splitting the team. Now, quite understandably, Roshi would have to be toned down, him merely being an unsuccessful ladies' man. He needs to have a flaw, but we can't just make him a wise old master with no flaws at all. And Krillin would already be his student, instead of just showing up in the second arc. Meanwhile, the force that would be trying to get the Dragon Balls before our heroes would be, of course, the Red Ribbon Army, with Commander Red as the main antagonist of the first movie, with Mercenary Tao as his right-hand man. Now, the tournament would be shorter than before and focus on the more important fights, especially Goku vs Jackie Chun. But after said conflict, Goku would learn that the Red Ribbon Army is chasing his friends, and he would convince Krillin to go with him to try and save them. He would save them from Eta, who would then switch sides there and then, and ultimately stop Commander Red in the Red Ribbon Army HQ. That way, you can condense around about 60 episodes or so into this movie reasonably well. And I think a nice thing to have would be having Dr. Gero and his son as supporting characters for the villain during this arc. Thusly, we are fully integrating them into the company, with Gero being the only one that survives the ordeal. Also, the whole Ozaru thing with destroying Pilaf's palace, yeah, that would have to happen in the Red Ribbon Army HQ instead. Now, speaking of the Pilaf gang, they would be mostly acting as comic relief here, having their own mini-arc a la Team Rocket in most of the Pokemon movies, with their story culminating in them finding a certain rice cooker. Now, the wish our heroes would make would have to be a selfless one, so probably it would involve fixing all the destruction that the Red Ribbon Army had caused on the way, including the likes of Bora, who could have been a minor supporting character. Now, is this idea perfect? Well, no. Then, okay, what was the point of this, Masako? Well, we're going to be pragmatic about this. We are not fully happy with this, as it kind of rushes through the story, and I don't think really anyone would be happy with trying to condense a huge portion of Dragon Ball into 2 hours. We're not fully happy with our interpretation, as it still sort of rushes through the story. We are trying to make the point that making a Dragon Ball movie standalone would be tricky, even for a couple of experts of the show. So think about the poor chaps who don't know a thing about the source material. But in our opinion, it does its best to touch upon the initial narrative threads that are important to know before Goku goes to face King Piccolo. Now, we purposefully did not cast any characters, as it's kind of hard to think about Dragon Ball characters as actual people. Not to mention, if we tried to do the whole cast, it would date the video even more. But that being said, it would be neat to see Sammy Hanratty play Bulma. We think, however, that what we've intended here could realistically fit into a 2-hour adventure movie of sorts. We get a decent product. It could be a little lighter than later installments, but it could set the tone at least. I mean, we don't want to have a Phantom Menace or Revenge of the Sith situation here, where both of these movies are pretty different from one another tonally. And although they were kinda connected to the growing up of the intended audience, nowadays filmmaking takes less time, so yeah. But what do you guys think? Do you like it? Do you want to hear how we would continue it, and then learn from our reasoning as well as ideas for sequels? Leave a comment below, and let's get this discussion going. And I shall see you in the next video. Catch you later!